The snow was falling softly outside my window while I set the table for Christmas dinner, 9 plates, 9 sets of cutlery, 9 little name cards I had written by hand. I warmed the house, lit the candles, and even put on the old Christmas music my children loved when they were young. I thought this year might feel like family again. I thought they would walk through the door smiling. Instead, that night became the moment I finally learned where I stood in their lives. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. I started that Christmas morning the same way I had started every Christmas since my children were little. I woke up early, wrapped myself in my warm robe, and went straight to the kitchen to begin cooking. I took out the flour to bake the sugar cookies they always loved, even though none of them had asked for them in years. I stirred the thick pot of stew on the stove, letting the smell fill the whole house, because that smell used to bring them running down the hallway when they were kids. I arranged their favorite Christmas mugs on the counter and set out the hot cocoa mix they liked when they were teenagers. Everything I did that morning came from the old habit of a mother who still wanted to believe her children would show up for her the same way she always showed up for them. As I set the table, I talked to myself the way older women do when they are alone for too long. I kept reminding myself that this year would be better, that maybe age had softened them, that maybe they missed me the way I missed them. I told myself not to think about how every holiday for the past 5 years had been rushed, brief, or skipped altogether. I ignored the memory of Thanksgiving, when only 2 of the 9 children visited for 15 minutes and spent most of that time scrolling on their phones. I ignored the birthdays they forgot, the calls they never returned, the messages they only sent when they needed money. I pushed all of that aside because it was Christmas, and mothers cling to hope even when it hurts. I moved slowly through the house, straightening pillows, adjusting lights, and checking the front door every now and then, as if they might arrive early for once. I even dressed up a little, put on a green sweater I bought years ago, brushed my thinning hair, wore the small necklace their father had given me before he passed. I stood in the hallway mirror and reminded myself that no matter how old I got, I was still their mother. A mother always believes she has a place in her children's hearts, even when all the signs say otherwise. Around noon, I prepared the dessert table, laying out the cake, the cookies, and the fruit salad. I made sure the living room was warm, turning up the heater because some of my children always complained about the cold. I sat down only for a minute to rest my feet and looked around the house with a quiet smile. Everything felt ready. Everything looked perfect. If someone had told me right then that I would spend the entire night alone, I would have laughed and told them they didn't know my children. But I realize now that I didn't know them either. When the clock reached 3 in the afternoon, I checked my phone. No messages, no updates. But I didn't panic. I simply walked back into the kitchen and stirred the stew again, telling myself they were probably busy wrapping gifts or still on the road. I set their presents under the tree, 9 boxes, each wrapped with care, each holding something thoughtful I had picked out during the past few months. I sat on the couch and imagined the moment they would open them, imagined their surprised smiles, imagined the warmth of having all my children under my roof again. I didn't know I was imagining something that would never come. As the sun began to set, a soft sadness tried to creep in, but I pushed it away. I walked outside to sweep the porch, even though it didn't need sweeping. I looked down the street, hoping to see headlights turning into my driveway. I even waved at the neighbors. They waved back kindly, probably assuming my house would soon be filled with family, laughter, and the sound of opening gifts. None of them could guess that I was about to face the coldest Christmas night of my life. When I walked back inside, I placed my hand over my heart for a moment, feeling the heaviness there. I kept whispering to myself, "They'll come." They promised. And even though I had lived long enough to know promises can break, I wanted so badly to believe in them. I wanted so badly to believe in the children I raised with love and sacrifice. I stood by the tree and took one last deep breath before checking my phone again. Still nothing. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me, the beginning of a pain I was not prepared for, and the beginning of a truth I could no longer outrun. When the first text came in, I actually smiled because I thought it was one of my children telling me they were on the way. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up the phone quickly, my heart lifting the way it always did when they reached out. But the smile faded the moment I read the message. "Sorry, Mom. Something came up. We'll try to stop by later." There was no explanation, no warmth, no "Merry Christmas," not even a simple heart emoji. Just a flat, cold sentence that told me everything I needed to know, but everything I didn't want to accept. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the screen as if maybe the message would change if I blinked enough. It didn't. I put the phone down and walked back into the kitchen, telling myself it was fine. One child canceling wasn't the end of Christmas. I still had 8 more coming. I stirred the cocoa, adjusted the cookies, reopened the oven to check the turkey again, even though it wasn't time. I kept my hands busy because if my hands stopped, my mind would start. 5 minutes later, the second text arrived. "Mom, weather's bad. Maybe tomorrow." Another one. "We're tired. Gonna rest today. Sorry." Then another. "We'll do Christmas next weekend instead." One by one, like a cruel little parade of excuses, all short, rushed, careless. No one asked if I was okay. No one asked if I needed help. No one said they were sad to miss it. I kept waiting for a real reason, something human, something believable. But every message sounded like they were brushing off a stranger, not their mother. I walked to the window and looked out. Snow was falling gently, soft and beautiful, but inside my chest, something felt tight and cold. I watched the streetlights blink on, one by one, as the last bit of daylight faded. For a moment, I told myself maybe they were joking, maybe they were running late, maybe they were planning a surprise. Mothers lie to themselves because the truth hurts more than any lie a child could tell. At 6:42 p.m., the final message came, the one that broke the rest of the night in half. "We're all going to Jason's place. It's just easier. Don't wait up. 9 children, 9 adults, 9 people I brought into this world. They had all chosen a different house on Christmas night. Not just chosen it, they agreed it was easier. I didn't even know what easier meant. Easier than visiting their own mother. Easier than sitting at the table I set for them. Easier than giving me 10 minutes of their time." I stepped onto my porch because my chest felt too tight inside the house. The cold air hit my face, but it didn't sting as much as the words burning in my mind. I looked across the street at the neighbor's house, lights bright, windows glowing with laughter, shadows of people moving around, clinking glasses, hugging, celebrating. And then I saw them, my children, all 9. Walking into Jason's home with wrapped gifts in their hands, smiling, fixing their coats, brushing snow off their boots. One of my daughters even tossed her hair back and laughed loudly, as if the night was perfect. They didn't look sad. They didn't look guilty. They didn't look like people who had just left their mother alone on Christmas. They looked free. I stood there in the cold, watching them disappear behind someone else's door, and something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet way that only a mother would understand. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was a realization, a painful one. They didn't forget me. They didn't get busy. They didn't change their plans. They abandoned me on purpose. I heard laughter burst from the neighbor's house, and it felt like someone had thrown those laughs straight at me. It wasn't jealousy. It was grief. A deep, raw grief that didn't come from losing 9 children, but from finally understanding I never really had them in the way I believed. I walked back inside, closing the door softly because even in heartbreak, I behaved gently. I looked at the table again, the untouched plates, the food growing cold, the candles burning down. I sat in my chair and folded my hands in my lap. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because of age or sickness, but because I was finally seeing the truth without making excuses for it. My children didn't leave me by mistake. They left me because that is who they had become. And for the first time in years, I stopped protecting them in my heart and started protecting myself. When I stepped back onto the porch to take one last look at the neighbor's house, the cold air filled my lungs in a way that made everything around me sharper. I told myself I would just watch for a moment, maybe try to understand why my children chose someone else's home instead of mine. But before I even had time to settle my thoughts, the front door of Jason's house opened again. Two of my daughters stepped outside to smoke, laughing loudly as they pulled their coats tighter around their shoulders. I should have gone back inside. I should have closed my own door and protected myself from what came next. But I stayed, frozen not from the cold, but from a strange mix of curiosity and pain. And that was when I heard the words that cracked the night wider open. They didn't see me standing in the shadows of my porch. They didn't know I could hear them. One of my daughters exhaled a long breath of smoke and said, "I'm glad we didn't go to Mom's." She would have cried, made everything dramatic. The other laughed, almost as if she found the idea of my heartbreak amusing. "Yeah, and you know how she is. She'd want us all to sit around and pretend we're kids again. I can't deal with that guilt-tripping stuff. Let her be alone. She'll get over it." The cold hit me then, not outside but inside, like a door slamming shut somewhere deep in my chest. I stood there listening to my own children talk about me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. But it wasn't just the cruelty that hurt, it was the honesty behind it. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They weren't pretending. They were speaking freely, like people who truly believed I wouldn't hear them and wouldn't matter even if I did. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just listened because something in me knew I needed to hear the whole truth, even if it burned. And it did. Another daughter stepped outside, this one carrying her phone. She was on a call with one of her brothers. "No, she's fine," she said in a dismissive tone. "Mom always manages. She doesn't really need us there. And besides, she doesn't have anything to offer. Jason's place has way better food, and it's bigger, so it makes sense for everyone to come here." She paused, laughed, and added, "Plus, she has no money. She can't host anything special." That sentence hit harder than the cold air. No money? I wasn't poor. I wasn't struggling. But I had never shown them what I had. I lived simply because that was who I was. I cooked instead of ordering takeout. I used coupons even though I didn't need to. I bought gifts for them quietly, without posting pictures. I never talked about the inheritance their father left me, never mentioned the investments I'd grown over decades, never discussed the trust funds I opened years ago, one for each child. I didn't flaunt my life. I just lived it. But hearing them talk, I realized they had turned my simplicity into a reason to dismiss me completely. They assumed lack instead of understanding privacy. The daughter on the phone continued, unaware her words were building something inside me. "She'll be fine. She has nothing going on anyway. We'll see her sometime next week. It's not like she's important enough to ruin everyone's plans." I felt those words settle on my shoulders like fresh snow, quiet but heavy. I wasn't important enough. That was the truth my children believed. While I stood there alone on my porch, watching their silhouettes laugh together, the night took on a different tone. It wasn't Christmas anymore. It was a moment of awakening. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as background, like an old decoration you notice only when it's missing. They believed I had nothing to offer, nothing valuable, nothing that could make them choose me over convenience. And in their minds, that was enough reason to leave me alone on a night when families around the world were holding hands, exchanging gifts, sharing meals, and telling old stories. I wasn't a priority. I wasn't even part of their plan. As I stood there, trying to swallow the lump forming in my throat, I heard one last thing that sealed everything inside me. The daughter with the phone said, "Mom has nothing anyway. Let her stay home alone. She'll be grateful we didn't bother her." Grateful. As if loneliness was a present. As if being forgotten was a gift. That was the moment something inside me shifted from pain to clarity. I wasn't simply abandoned. I was dismissed. I wasn't overlooked. I was avoided. And they genuinely believed I would never change, never fight back, never stand up for myself because I had never done it before. They thought I would sit quietly with my little cookies and my warm cocoa, waiting like a forgotten ornament they could dust off when convenient. But they were wrong. They didn't know who I used to be before motherhood softened me. They didn't know what I was capable of. They didn't know what I had. And they certainly didn't know they had just walked away from the biggest gift they would ever lose in their lives. And as the snow kept falling and their laughter faded into the night, I stood on my porch and realized something very important. This Christmas wasn't the end of a tradition. It was the end of my tolerance. I stood there in the cold, listening to my own children laugh without a single thought about me, and something inside my chest began opening, slowly, painfully, like an old wound that had been stitched too tightly. As I turned back into my house and closed the door behind me, the warmth of the living room wrapped around me, but it didn't reach my heart. I walked over to the family photos that lined the hallway, touching each frame as memories rose up like ghosts. And for the first time in years, I let myself remember the life I had lived before I became the quiet, invisible version of myself my children believed I was. I remembered the years right after my husband died. We had been married for almost 40 years, and when he passed, he left behind something most people never knew about. He had been careful with money, wise with investments, and secretive when he needed to be. Together, we built a life quietly, modestly, without showing off. We bought small things instead of big ones. We saved instead of spending, and we made decisions based on peace, not pride. After his funeral, when the lawyer called me into the office, I sat there with trembling hands, expecting nothing more than a modest insurance payout and maybe a few small accounts. But I was wrong. My husband had left me more than I could have imagined. Savings accounts I didn't know existed. Stocks bought decades earlier that had multiplied. Properties under a trust. A retirement account we never touched because we lived simply. All of it organized in careful files with my name on every line. When I left the lawyer's office that day, I carried not just a heavy envelope, but the weight of a secret that I wasn't ready to tell anyone, not even my children. I did not tell them because I wanted them to learn how to stand on their own feet. I wanted them to build their own lives, not wait for mine to end. And I didn't want my grief to be mixed with opportunism. So I stayed quiet. I lived in the same modest house. I used the same old furniture. I wore simple clothes. I clipped coupons, cooked at home, and shopped during sales. Not because I needed to, but because I had always been that way. I hid my bank statements. I never discussed money. I let them think I was surviving on a small pension, barely getting by. They didn't ask questions because they didn't want to know the truth. My financial life was not important to them unless it benefited them directly. But the truth was, I had more money than all 9 of my children combined. I had been given the kind of security people dream of, and yet I guarded it quietly because I didn't want it to change who my children were. I didn't want them to look at me as a wallet. I didn't want them to wait around for me to die so they could take what wasn't theirs yet. I wanted to believe that they loved me simply because I was their mother. But tonight proved I was wrong about that too. As I stood in front of those framed memories, my hand resting on the glass, I realized that the simplicity I lived with had been misunderstood. They saw my life as small because I did not brag. They saw me as weak because I did not fight. They assumed I had nothing because I never talked about what I had built, and they believed leaving me alone on Christmas would not break something inside me because I had never shown anger or stood up for myself before. But there was another part of the story they didn't know. Years ago, before their father died, he and I set up something special, a trust fund for each child. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to give them stability, comfort, and opportunity. College money, house money, emergency money. Money meant to help them stand tall long after we were gone, and I had spent years adding to those funds, quietly, consistently, lovingly. 9 children, 9 separate trust accounts, all under my control. They never knew because we wanted to surprise them when they were older, when they were settled, when they proved they understood responsibility. We imagined a Christmas morning where we would hand them envelopes filled with futures. We pictured their tears, their gratitude, their joy. But standing here now, in this quiet house on a cold Christmas night they didn't bother to show up for, something inside me shifted. That surprise no longer felt like a blessing. It felt like a weapon put into the wrong hands. If my children could abandon me so easily now, when all I wanted was a meal together, what would they do if they knew I controlled the largest piece of their future? The answer was simple. They would take. They would expect. They would tear me apart piece by piece until nothing was left. I looked at the old envelope where the trust documents were kept. My husband had written our children's names on the tabs with careful handwriting. I touched each name gently and felt a wave of sadness wash over me. The love we poured into these plans, the excitement, all wasted. Because money cannot fix a heart that no longer sees you as family. And on that cold night, I realized something important. My silence had protected them long enough. Now it needed to protect me. In the silence of that long night, after the truth of my children's feelings settled heavy in my chest, I walked slowly through my home and began to notice things I had ignored for months, maybe even years. Little signs I brushed aside because I did not want to believe my own children were capable of using me. But once the veil lifted, everything became painfully clear. It felt like someone had wiped steam off a mirror, and suddenly I could see the reflection of reality staring back at me. The first sign had been the way they spoke to me in recent months, not with love, not with care, but with impatience. They spoke to me like someone they were tolerating, not someone they cherished. Whenever they called, the conversations were short, rushed, and transactional. "Mom, I need help with this bill." "Mom, can you watch the kids?" "Mom, can you send a little money until payday?" And every time, I gave. Without complaint, without hesitation. I thought I was helping. I didn't know I was enabling entitlement. As the months passed, their tone changed even more. They stopped asking how I was doing. They stopped stopping by unless they needed something. They didn't invite me to dinners unless they wanted me to bring food. They never asked if I was lonely, if I needed anything, or even if I was okay. They simply assumed I would always be there at the bottom of their priority list, waiting to serve. Then came the second sign, comments they thought I didn't notice. Things said casually, but with meaning underneath. "Mom, you don't need all this space. Why don't you move into something smaller? This house is old. You should think about letting us help manage it. Do you really need a full home when you're alone?" At the time, I thought they worried about my safety or upkeep. But now, with everything clear as day, I understood what they really meant. We want your house. We want control. We want ownership. My daughters mentioned it more than my sons. They pretended it was concern. But the way they looked at the walls, the furniture, the yard, it was the look of people planning something. And when they whispered to each other, thinking I couldn't hear, I now recognize those whispers for what they truly were, calculations. The third sign arrived slowly, quietly, and in ways that only make sense after you connect the dots. Some of my drawers looked disturbed, but I thought maybe I had misplaced things. My son borrowed my car and kept it longer than he should, looking through the glove compartment for papers he left last time. My daughter-in-law asked if I ever considered putting someone younger on my accounts to help me manage them just in case. One of my sons even brought me pamphlets from a senior living facility, pretending it was part of a charity he was helping with. But now I knew why they had done all that. Those were tests, trials, ways to see how far they could push me, and I had let them push too far. It was only after I overheard them on Christmas Eve, laughing, drinking, celebrating at someone else's house, that the final piece fell into place. Their words about me being too emotional, poor, old, and a burden didn't come from stress or frustration. They came from a belief they had built over years, that I was useless, weak, and ready to be replaced. They wanted my house, my money, my trust funds, and my silence. They wanted me tucked away somewhere small, somewhere quiet, somewhere where they wouldn't be reminded I existed unless I was signing something over to them. The part that stung the most was realizing that they didn't forget me on Christmas. They intentionally chose to celebrate without me. They didn't just fail to show up. They didn't want to show up. They made plans behind my back, laughed at my excitement, and left me sitting alone in a decorated home waiting for people who had already decided I wasn't worth their time. And then the most painful realization of all hit me. They weren't planning to leave me out for one night. They were planning to leave me out forever. My absence was not an accident. It was preparation. Preparation to isolate me. Preparation to claim my things. Preparation to push me out of my own life while pretending they were helping. I sat in my kitchen chair, hands trembling, as the truth became clearer than ever. My children were not drifting away. They were circling my life like vultures waiting for the right moment. And their Christmas abandonment was not the beginning of their betrayal. It was the moment they finally felt confident enough to act openly. They thought they were clever. They thought I was blind. They thought I had nothing, but they were wrong on every level. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight and the last of the candles burned low, I finally said to myself the words I had been scared to admit. I do not owe them my life, and I do not owe them my future. When the house became truly silent, I finally let myself sit down. The clock had just passed midnight. Christmas Day had arrived, but there was no warmth in my home, no laughter, no footsteps coming through the door, no hugs, only the quiet sound of the heater and the faint ticking of the old wall clock my husband once repaired with his own hands. I sat at the end of the dining table, looking at the candles I had lit hours earlier. Their flames had grown smaller, and so had my hope. Every empty chair around that table told a story, not of absence, but of choices. Their choices. I placed my hands on the table and stared at the plates I had prepared for each one of my children. It felt foolish now, how carefully I had arranged their favorite dishes, how much love I had put into every small detail. I could almost see the ghosts of old Christmas mornings, my children running around with excitement, ripping wrapping paper, climbing onto my lap, begging for more cookies. I had held all 9 of them in my arms when they were small. I fed them, bathed them, comforted them when they were scared, and now, as adults, they left me sitting alone in the same home they once filled with joy. A strange heaviness settled in my chest. Not anger, not even sadness, but a quiet kind of pain. The kind you feel when you finally see the truth you tried to ignore. I touched my cheek, and only then did I notice the tears that had dried there. I hadn't even realized I was crying. My eyes drifted toward the window. Snow was falling gently, covering the street in a soft white blanket. The world outside looked peaceful, but I felt like something inside me had cracked open for the first time. And then it happened. The moment that changed me. A thought entered my mind, simple and sharp. If I died tonight, none of them would know until they needed money. It hit me so hard, I had to grip the edge of the table. My children didn't forget me. They didn't love me in their own way. They didn't mean well, but made mistakes. No, they abandoned me because they wanted to. They ignored me because it was easier. They left me alone because they saw no benefit in being with me. They considered me a burden, a background character, someone who existed to give and never to receive. The truth burned through all the excuses I had made for them over the years. I stood up and walked slowly through the living room. Each step echoed differently. I walked toward the small bookshelf near the window, where every year I kept their childhood drawings. I pulled out the one my youngest daughter made when she was 5, a simple picture of us holding hands with the words, "Mommy, I love you forever." I held it against my chest and closed my eyes. But the picture felt like a lie now, a memory from a time when love was given without calculation. I went to the mirror and stared at myself. I looked tired, older than I felt inside. My hands were shaking. My heart was heavy. But behind that heaviness, something was forming, something I hadn't felt in years, a kind of strength that grows not from anger, but from awakening. I realized something else that night. I had been living for my children for so long that I had forgotten how to live for myself. I had forgiven them every time they ignored me, dismissed me, forgot my birthday, forgot holidays, canceled plans, took money they never paid back. I told myself that was motherhood. I told myself they were busy, tired, stressed. But standing there, staring into my own eyes, I finally admitted the truth. Motherhood should not mean sacrificing your self-worth. Love should not mean accepting disrespect. That night, I understood a painful but liberating truth. I was not lonely. I was free. Their absence was not a curse. It was information, information about their priorities, information about their character, information about how little they valued me, and information is powerful if you're brave enough to act on it. I walked back to the dining table, blew out the last candle, and gently removed each plate. Not with anger, not with heartbreak, but with a strange calm that washed over me like warm water. I packed the leftover food into containers, cleaned the dishes, wiped the counters. My hands moved slowly, almost gracefully. By the time I finished, something inside me had shifted completely. I wasn't their victim anymore. I wasn't waiting for apologies that would never come. I wasn't hoping for a family that didn't exist. I was done. I sat down one last time in the dark, letting the silence fill me, not as an enemy, but as a companion. And in that stillness, the idea came to me, clear as snow falling outside. If they wanted a life without me, then I would give them one, a real one, a permanent one, and the first step would begin in the morning. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was crying, but because my mind had finally cleared. The pain was still there, yes, but it had changed shape. It wasn't the heavy, helpless ache a mother feels when her children forget her. It was sharper now, cleaner, almost like a warning bell ringing inside me. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the heater and the distant sound of snowplows outside. My body was still, but my thoughts were moving fast. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what my children needed from me. I was thinking about what I needed to do for myself. By the time the sun began to rise, I already knew my next step. I stood up, made a cup of hot tea, and sat at the small round table in the kitchen, the same one where I had fed all 9 children breakfast when they were little. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, feeling the heat steady me. Then I pulled out my old file box from the cabinet. Inside was the entire record of my husband's life's work. Investments, savings, real estate papers, bonds, trust accounts. Everything he had built over 40 years. Everything he had left to me, not to them, not to a joint name, not to a shared account. Just me. I remembered the day he held my hand and said, "If anything happens to me, you make the decisions. Not them. You." Back then, I thought he was exaggerating. I believed our children would care for me, that they would value the home we made together. But now I understood exactly why he had insisted. He saw the world more clearly than I did. He knew entitlement can grow quietly, like mold in the corners of a family, until one day it takes over completely. I opened the first envelope, 9 trust funds, 1 for each child. All 9 had been under my control, all 9 still untouched. For years I had been planning to surprise them when the time felt right. I wanted to leave them something meaningful, a safety net, a piece of their father's legacy. But now, as I looked at those papers, I felt no hesitation. Not a single dollar would go to people who abandoned their mother on Christmas night. I pushed aside the guilt that tried to creep in. This wasn't revenge born from anger. This was protection born from clarity. They had shown me they didn't care about me, only what I could give them. And my husband did not work 40 years so that 9 ungrateful adults could drink, travel, party, and forget the woman who raised them. I opened my laptop and signed into my financial accounts. All the trust funds were still active, each with a balance that would have changed their futures. I hovered my mouse over the transfer button for a long moment. My hands didn't shake. Not this time. Then I clicked. One by one, each account froze. One by one, each balance was moved. One by one, their futures shifted without them knowing it yet. The money went into something new, a foundation in my name, organized overnight by the bank manager who had known my family for years. A foundation aimed at supporting elderly women abandoned by their children, single mothers living on small pensions, and older widows who had no one left to help them. Women like me. Women who knew the pain of giving everything and receiving nothing. It felt right. It felt fair. It felt like the first decision I had made in years that truly belonged to me. Once the transfers were complete, I pushed the laptop aside and sat quietly, letting the weight of the moment settle. I expected to feel guilty, but I didn't. I expected to feel scared, but I didn't. The overwhelming feeling was peace. A deep, quiet peace that I had not felt in years. Next, I gathered my important documents: passport, ID, property papers, insurance records. I packed them neatly into a folder. Then I packed a suitcase, just one. Clothes, shoes, essentials. No sentimental items, no photos, nothing that tied me emotionally to this house or this life. I wasn't running away from my children. I was simply walking out of a place where I wasn't valued. Before closing the suitcase, I took one last look around my home. Every corner carried a memory. Every wall held a story. But memories alone cannot build respect. Stories alone cannot create love. I realized I had been living inside a museum of the past, waiting for people who had long forgotten what this place meant. I zipped the suitcase shut. I was leaving, not to punish them, not to frighten them, not to prove a point. I was leaving because staying was painful and going was finally possible. I slipped my phone into my purse, locked the door behind me, and placed the key under the mat. I walked down the snowy steps to the waiting taxi I had called earlier. As it pulled away from the house, I didn't look back. For the first time in years, my life was mine. The next morning, I woke up in a small but warm hotel room 2 towns away. The heater hummed softly, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel rushed, worried, or tense. I wasn't waiting for anyone to call. I wasn't listening for footsteps, expecting arguments, or bracing for disappointment. I just sat on the edge of the hotel bed, wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, and let myself breathe. Deep, steady breaths that felt like they were clearing years of pain from my chest. I made a cup of coffee using the little machine by the window and watched the sun rise quietly over the parking lot. It wasn't a fancy view, but it was peaceful, and peace mattered more to me than any decoration or luxury. Around 8:12 a.m., the silence broke. My phone buzzed once, then again, and then it began ringing non-stop. 9 children calling, 9 different names flashing on the screen. I didn't answer. I just stared at the phone as it vibrated violently across the nightstand. Calls turned into messages. Messages turned into voice notes. Their voices were frantic, desperate, not with worry for me, but with panic for themselves. "Mom, what happened to my account? Everything is gone. All of it. Call me now. This must be a mistake. Fix it. Mom, answer your phone. This is serious." None of them said, "Are you okay?" None of them said, "Where are you?" None of them said, "We're worried." They only asked about the money, and that told me all I needed to know. I set the phone down, let it ring, let it scream for my attention. I didn't owe them any response. Not after the Christmas night they gave me. Not after years of treating me like a spare part in their lives instead of a mother. I took another sip of my coffee and felt a strange but satisfying calm settle into my bones. They were finally feeling even a portion of the fear, confusion, and hurt they had made me live with. Around 9 a.m., the hotel phone rang, which startled me. Nobody knew I was here. The front desk said, "Ma'am, your family is here looking for you." My heart didn't race. I didn't panic. I simply gathered my things, placed my coat back on, and walked calmly to the lobby. I stood behind a wall and looked out quietly without stepping into view. Outside, all 9 of them were standing together in the parking lot, some in pajamas, some with coats thrown on in a rush, some still holding their phones up like they were expecting answers to fall from the sky. They looked angry. They looked confused, but not one of them looked concerned for me. One daughter shouted at the sky as if that would bring her money back. Another son paced back and forth, swearing under his breath. My oldest was on the phone with the bank, shouting, "She can't just take it back, that's ours." But the bank had already told him. The accounts were never theirs, not legally, not in any paperwork, not even in the fine print. My husband and I had protected everything with clear signatures and clear intent. The funds belonged to me until the day I chose to release them. And now I chose not to. I watched them for a few minutes. 9 grown adults acting like their lives had ended because they could no longer rely on me financially. Children I gave everything to. Children who left me alone on Christmas night without a second thought. Eventually, they got into their cars and drove to my house. I stayed back and watched the snow fall as I called the taxi I had arranged earlier. When I arrived at my house 10 minutes later, they were already there, banging on the door, yelling my name, demanding I come out. But I didn't go inside. I didn't even get close. I stood across the street beneath the tall oak tree and watched as they realized the house was empty. My things gone, the furniture neatly covered, the keys missing from the usual hook. My youngest tried to break in through the back door. Another tried the windows. Their panic rose with every failed attempt. Finally, one of them spotted the small envelope taped to the door. They all crowded around it like starving wolves. Inside was a simple typed note. "You left me alone on Christmas night. Now I leave you out of my future. Mom." The yelling began immediately. Some shouted my name angrily. Others argued among themselves. A few cursed at the empty house, as if it had betrayed them and not the other way around. But none of them saw me standing under the tree, watching their chaos with quiet eyes. They didn't notice the taxi pulling up beside me. They didn't see me place my suitcase inside. They didn't hear me say, "Airport, please." As the car pulled away, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I was not the one being abandoned. I was the one leaving. As the taxi drove toward the airport, I watched the familiar streets pass by, places I had spent decades walking through, grocery stores where I bought snacks for my children, the park where I pushed 9 strollers one after another, the school they all attended. Every corner held a memory, but none of those memories pulled me back. Not after what I survived the night before. Not after seeing the truth of their faces that morning. My heart felt strangely calm, not healed yet, but free in a way I hadn't felt in years. I held my purse tightly on my lap, not out of fear, but out of a sense of new purpose. Everything that mattered was in that bag: my documents, my ID, the letters I had prepared, and the final pieces of my old life that I chose to carry forward. At the airport, I sat quietly on a bench with my suitcase by my feet. The cold floor tiles, the hum of distant announcements, the rolling wheels of travelers passing by, all of it felt like signs of a world I was finally ready to step into on my own terms. My phone buzzed nonstop in my coat pocket. Dozens of calls, hundreds of messages, all 9 children, none asking about my health, none asking if I was safe. Everything was, "How could you do this? Put the money back. You are crazy. We need that money. I have bills, Mom." I opened a few messages just to read the tone, not because I cared about the words. The desperation wasn't for me. It was for their lost comfort, their lost cushion, their lost advantage. Losing money hurt them far more than losing their mother's trust ever had. One message stood out, from my eldest daughter. "If you don't answer in the next 10 minutes, I swear I will never speak to you again." I read it twice. Then I laughed a quiet, tired laugh, the kind that comes out of someone who has finally seen enough to stop chasing love where it does not exist. They hadn't spoken to me on Christmas night. They didn't check on me for days. They didn't care if I sat alone with cold food and melting candles. But now, when their bank accounts were empty, suddenly my voice mattered. I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled out the 9 letters I had written the night before, each one for a different child. Letters they would receive soon through certified mail. Letters with my handwriting, not for comfort, but for closure. Each letter said the same simple message: "You left me alone when I needed my family. Now I leave you alone with what you chose. Your greed is no longer my responsibility." No anger, no insults, just truth. One by one, I sealed them and placed them into the mailbox just outside the terminal. It felt like laying down 9 heavy stones I had carried on my back for decades. When the last letter slid through the metal slot, I felt my shoulders loosen for the first time since my husband died. As I walked into the airport lobby, a strange peace washed over me. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. A sense that I had finally stepped out of a life that had been draining me slowly, year after year. A life where I cooked, cleaned, gifted, babysat, comforted, paid bills, covered emergencies, and gave unconditional love in return for crumbs. Now my children would learn a lesson life had tried to teach them gently, but they ignored. Love cannot be demanded, respect cannot be forced, and money never replaces family. When I reached the gate, I watched planes take off one after another, lifting into the sky and disappearing into clouds. Every time a plane rose, I felt a strange pull in my chest, not fear, but anticipation. It was as if each departing flight was whispering, "You're next. You're finally choosing yourself." My phone buzzed again. I finally looked. This time it wasn't anger. It was panic. "Mom, please don't go." "Where are you?" "We're sorry. Just come back." "Mom, we need to talk." But I saw through their fear. They weren't sorry for abandoning me. They weren't sorry for mocking me. They weren't sorry for choosing a party over their mother on Christmas. They were sorry for losing the money. The difference mattered more than anything. I powered off my phone. The silence that followed was beautiful, clean, empty, free of guilt, free of begging, free of manipulation. For the first time in my life, no one could reach me. No one could guilt-trip me. No one could use love as a weapon. When the boarding announcement echoed through the airport, I stood up. My legs felt strong, stronger than they had felt in years. I picked up my suitcase, walked to the gate, handed over my ticket, and stepped onto the plane. Behind me were 9 adult children who chose greed over their mother. Ahead of me was a life with no expectations, no demands, no pretending. As the plane door closed, I closed my eyes and let out a slow, final sigh. They lost their inheritance. I found my freedom. When the plane landed in the small coastal town I had chosen, the air felt different the moment I stepped outside. It wasn't heavy. It didn't carry the weight of 9 people expecting something from me. It smelled of salt, warm bread from nearby cafes, and the faint scent of flowers carried by the wind. I stood there for a moment with my suitcase beside me, letting the breeze touch my face, letting my shoulders drop. It felt like the first breath of a new life, one I didn't have to fight for, beg for, or shrink myself to fit into. For the first time in many years, I wasn't a mother who needed to earn her children's attention. I was simply a woman choosing her own peace. The small home I rented overlooked the water. It wasn't big, but it was warm, bright, and mine in a way nothing had been for a long time. I unpacked slowly that first night, not because I was tired, but because I was finally free to move at my own pace. No calls, no demands, no emergencies waiting for me. Every drawer I filled made the place feel more like a sanctuary. I placed a photo of my late husband on the table, lit a candle beside it, and whispered, "I finally listened to your last advice. Live for yourself." For years after he passed, I had filled my loneliness with obligations toward my children. I thought caring for them would keep me connected, but I learned the painful truth. You cannot hold on to people who have already let go of you. Days in my new town passed quietly. I joined a morning walking group of older women who laughed freely, spoke kindly, and listened without judgment. I found a small bakery where the owner remembered my name after the second visit. I met a retired teacher who invited me to help with reading classes for children who didn't have grandparents. Everything I gave there was appreciated, not expected. Every gesture was met with warmth, not entitlement. It reminded me that family is not always blood. Family is the people who choose you, value you, and protect your spirit instead of draining it. Every Christmas afterward, I baked cookies with the children from the reading group. Their smiles felt more honest than anything I had seen from my own children in years. They didn't care what I brought to the table. They didn't measure my worth through money or gifts. They just liked that I showed up. One little girl hugged me and said, "You're like my Christmas grandma." And that single sentence healed something inside me that 9 children never bothered to touch. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I would think about my old life. The empty chair on Christmas Eve, the untouched plates, the silence that filled my home while my 9 adult children celebrated somewhere else. I would ask myself if I missed them. The answer was complicated but honest. I missed the idea of them, the version of them I raised when they were still kind, still innocent, still warm. But I did not miss the adults they became. I did not miss the greed. I did not miss the disrespect. I did not miss feeling like a wallet with legs instead of a mother with a heart. After a few months, I received a letter from one of my children, my middle daughter. It was long, emotional, full of regret. She said she realized too late what they had done, that she understood what it meant to abandon someone on a holiday built on love. She begged me to come home. She wrote that the family was falling apart without me, but even then, her last sentence told the real story. We need you, not I love you, not I'm sorry, just we need you. Need, not love. Need, not accountability. Need, not respect. I folded the letter neatly, put it away, and did not reply. Time had taught me something precious. Forgiveness is possible, but returning to pain is a choice. And I chose myself. My life grew simpler, softer. I spent mornings by the water, afternoons reading, evenings talking to friends who treated me like a person, not an obligation. I slept peacefully, without waiting for the phone to ring with demands. I ate meals without rushing. I lived without fear of being used. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't hurting. I was finally living. And that is the real moral of my story. Being a mother does not mean giving up your self-worth. Being a parent does not mean allowing disrespect. Love does not require turning yourself into a doormat. I gave my children everything I had for decades, but the day they left me alone on Christmas night, they also left my life. And the morning they woke up to empty bank accounts, I woke up to a new beginning. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is walking away from people who only remember your value when their hands are empty. I didn't lose 9 children. I found my peace.